Hi guys, welcome to Let's Talk BD, the official podcast of the BD School, the first educational platform entirely dedicated to business development. Here we interview business development professionals working in the field every day, as well as startup founders, so they can give you all the insights, tips, and best practices to help you become a better business development professional. Let's get ready for the next episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk BD podcast. This week we have a special guest on the podcast. It's not a business developer or a founder as you're usually used to, because this time we found someone more in the talent acquisition space. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Kristopher. Hello, Kristopher.
Hello.
Nice. Well, I always like to leave the introductions to you. So go ahead. Maybe you can tell us more about what you do, your job, and of course, introduce yourself to Let's Talk BD podcast listeners.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, my name is Kris, and I've been in talent acquisition and sales and marketing as well for the last 8 years. My career started as on the agency side. So I helped healthcare companies, startups, et cetera, find permanent personnel across the board from sales, marketing to healthcare providers. And then after 5 years of doing that, I ran my own agency for 2 years, helping startups, high growth startups specifically, find sales personnel, business developers, marketers, some operational folks. And then more recently, I'm now the regional director of recruitment for a Fortune 500 company here in the United States.
Awesome. So, Kris, definitely you're someone that has seen a lot of business developers in action while they were looking for their jobs. And before we get really into the theme of the day, which is really finding the right business developers and, of course, helping our business developers listening to prepare at best for their interviews, let's start really from the basics. So, of course, you've been working also in marketing sales for a while. So my first question is, what do you consider to be business development, which is always a very interesting one?
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine you get a lot of answers with this specific question. But to me, a business developer can be anybody that's really driving that new business, whether that be through what I consider to be direct marketing, which would be your emails, your social media campaigns, your LinkedIn messages, so forth, to more of what you would consider under the sales umbrella, which might be more of cold calling, door knocking, things of that nature. I think both can come together and be business development. And from a talent acquisition perspective, you absolutely see job descriptions that require both, individually one or the other. And so I'm curious to hear your take on that, but that's kind of my perspective there.
Nice. I like that. And you're very right. So when we ask this question, we usually get very different answers. But I think yours was quite complete because indeed, at the end of the day, it's about generating value, right? And I think the value of business developers is really in the way we look for this value and these opportunities, which can be very diverse and can really set the company up for success rather than just, of course, doing repetitive tasks. I don't know, for example, only cold outreach or working only on one channel and so on. So I think you nailed it. We're quite aligned on that. All right. So, but of course, well, business development is quite of a broad field. So I can imagine that also in your experience when recruiting business developers, it must not be extremely easy, right? Because everybody is different and they might fit some criteria that you're looking for. So how challenging it is to find the right business developers in your experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think, when you're a business owner or you're leading a team of business developers, I think there's a problem because we don't have that first question defined. I think the most success I can have in helping people recruit those folks or where companies have the most success in recruiting the right people is when they kind of change their perspective, just like with sales or marketing or business development itself, is it's not always a volume game. It's a quality of being clearly defined with what your outcome is, who the person is that you're looking for, and then figuring out, where do they align on your core values, on what you want them to do day to day. And I think when you go at it from the wrong approach, where you play the volume game, you spend a lot of time interviewing a lot of people that seem to miss the mark, or worse, you take a gamble on somebody because you think if you can get a few people in the door, maybe you'll have some proper attrition and you'll narrow down and you'll find the right people for your team. And I think you waste a lot more time, money, and energy doing things that way So I guess my first piece of advice there and solving for the complexity of finding the right person is to be crystal clear about what it is you're looking for. And that's not always the experience side of things. It might be more down to the type of person, the personality, the motivations, and things of that nature first.
A very good point. Very good point. And that actually leads me to my second question, because indeed, like, I completely agree with you that sometimes it's not really the experience and so on, but it's really about the personality of the resource that you're talking to, right? Which can make a difference. So what are the skills, or like, let's say more the personality traits that you look for when you're hiring specifically business developers? Have you found like some personalities that work better as BDs or not?
Yeah, this is complicated. And actually, I had the pleasure of about 2 years ago, I had a conversation with a leading AI expert in the field of talent acquisition. And he's actually based out of Australia. And he was solving for, how do we use personality assessments to better match people to jobs? And this wasn't necessarily directly related to sales or business development. But what he said to me was quite interesting, is that we don't have enough data yet to use a machine or a system or assessment to perfectly align who's the right person. And the reason is people are too complex. And so I don't necessarily think I look for certain personality traits, but I do look for a few things that align in people. A clear understanding of why they do what they do is probably the most important. I think it's easier to coach, mentor, and train somebody that's fully aware of who they are and why they work and why they show up every day, why they want to make commission, why they may want to make more money, why they might want to grow a business. And I think that's the most important place to start. And then I think the other thing I can say too is I always say I love the Steve Jobs approach, where you take somebody into your company and you show them what you're doing. And if they light up and they're more excited about the product than you are, then you're probably working with the right person, because even when things get complicated, they know that they're aligned with your mission. They're excited about what you're doing, and they'll stay for the long haul. And that's important.
Oh, good points. And I think I will use the approach of Steve Jobs, by the way, for moving forward. But you touch upon a very important topic, which is self-awareness, right? I completely agree with you that it's much easier to indeed train someone that is aware of their own limitations, their strengths, and so on. And I think it's also very important in BD when you're relating to external people, if you're talking to clients or partners, for example. But sometimes I think it's a bit difficult to identify this, how self-aware is the person, right? So over the years, I developed my own technique to find that out, but I'm curious about your own technique. So what do you ask people, or what do you let them do to identify if they're really self-aware?
Yeah, I think one of the best things you could do is again, it's kind of like a good sales approach. You, as the person conducting the interview, should be asking more questions and driving the conversation. But I think you need to make it more conversational. I think too many times in an interview, when we're trying to figure out something about somebody, it's two people going back and forth, kind of playing this game where both are only showing their positive sides. And I think if you make yourself approachable and you make it seem more like a conversation that you would have with somebody at the gym or on the street, you'll get more honesty and transparency in your answers. And once you get to that place, you can start asking questions that are more tailored to previous failures. And I think you can learn about a lot from somebody when you ask them a question like, tell me why you might not have succeeded, or tell me a time where you didn't succeed in the past on a project. And then you ask them to explain what happened. And I think when someone starts answering questions, those types of questions specifically, with responses like, I had a team that wouldn't do this, or we weren't aligned as a team, or we didn't do this, or so-and-so didn't do this, you start to understand that type of person maybe not looking inward enough. And I think when you get the right person, the answers that they'll give is, unfortunately, I wasn't experienced enough in this area, and I might have fell short doing this, or my attitude might have not been correct in this area, and that's something I've been working on. And I think when they start answering with I instead of we or they, I think you can really hone in on the fact that you found somebody that is pretty self-aware.
Really good tip. I think I will really pay attention from now on. It's like, my way of doing it is really along the lines of what you said. So my interviews are usually very chill in the sense that I don't want the other person to feel stressed. I want them to be themselves because I want to see the real self, right? Although there is always a moment in which I asked about what do they consider to be like one of their major strengths and so on. That's people always fall a little bit short, I would say. They tend to get into this mask face, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I cannot say everything, right? But I do agree with you. It's much better to have someone that is honest, and that can recognize when they are falling short on something. And along the same line of the previous question, right? So here we talked about self-awareness as one of the, let's say, key indicator, if we want, of success, right? How about like some things that, when you spot them in the interview, they really make you think, all right, this person is not going to make a good BD. Is there something based on your experience that, predicts also the level of, let's say, failure of that specific person?
Yeah, I think the number one thing would be a lack of coachability. I think a lot of companies, when they are hiring someone in the BD space, they're going to get people that might be a little bit greener in their career, or they might get somebody that's experienced but is open-minded. Those people tend to work out. I think where you run into major problems is when you start hiring people that are very, very fixed in the way things have been done in the past. Because like we said in the very beginning of this conversation, a BD can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think some of the fixed answers you've received maybe in the past on the podcast on what a BD is because, one interpretation of what that person is, a cold outreach person, and that's it. And that's all you're going to show up and do every day. And if you're trying to hire somebody to fit that mold and they have a fixed mindset and their perspective of business development is something a little bit different, you are going to run into some cultural problems, and nothing's going to hurt your organization more than a bad hire in that sense. And it's expensive because you have to re-recruit. You might be using an agency, even just to get your job listings on some of these job boards and to do some LinkedIn and paid search. And that way, I mean, it's expensive and I think it's costly. So I'd say fixed mindsets is the scariest thing to hire for.
Absolutely. Bad hires are really the worst, like, let's say, spend of time for companies, right? And I agree with you. Lack of coachability is definitely one major issue. I think, like, across all functions, not necessarily only in business development, but it is true that in BD you do need that level of adaptability, right? That can really make a difference when talking with different types of people. All right, and just to close this segment, let's say more helpful to the business developers, do you have some tips to prepare at best for interviews for a business development role? Some things that you really advise everybody to do when they're applying for a job in BD?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I think the market's pretty competitive in this space right now. I think it's very complicated. Let's say a business development job opens up on LinkedIn and it's remote and it's open to everybody. Within 30 seconds, that job's going to receive 200 plus applications. And so my first piece of advice is to be a little bit more creative on where you're looking for jobs. I think go to job boards that are a little less frequent. I think go to local job boards in your current market. But I think most importantly, your chance of success in getting a job goes up like 60 or 70%. I saw recently on a Monster review that if you get referred in. And so I think you need to use your LinkedIn network. You need to reach out to friends and family. You need to get referred in the best you can. Sometimes that's using your business development skills to message hiring managers and get in front of people. And then once you're there, when you're preparing for those interviews, I think you need to stop fixating on preparing for certain questions are going to be asked. And again, go back and look inside and make sure that you have the right approach to answering questions. It's not that you need to know the answer to every question, but it's the way you handle it. I think you have to respond to questions by reiterating the questions to make sure you're answering the right things. I think once you do that, you answer it concisely. And then most importantly, you provide an example to every question that you're asked. So you're not just saying, yes, I've done that before, but instead you're saying, yes, I've done that before, for example, and then ending each question by saying, does that answer your question? Because I think a lot of us that have interviewed people before find it frustrating when people just give us yes or no's, when they don't answer questions thoroughly, or when they answer the wrong question. And I think you can avoid some of those pitfalls by doing those things.
That's you just brought me to a completely different topic here. Now I had a question in mind, but I'm going to change it in favor of this other one because you touch upon a topic which I think it's quite interesting and probably is not very clear for the applicants, right? For the business developer applying, maybe it's not very clear that on the other hand, they have like a recruiter, let's say, that also has goals and, probably that they have seen already like a lot of people and so on. So you mentioned already a couple of things that frustrate recruiters, right? For example, not answering the right question. Do you have some other things that really frustrate you that, people do in interviews or during the recruitment process that, like if someone does that thing, it's a no for sure for you?
Yeah, it's not necessarily, there's very small things that make a big difference. So, I think it's Charlie Munger, if you're familiar, or anybody that's listening is familiar, is like a famous investor. And he said, if you want an outcome, always think of exactly how to not get there. And so I think if you're someone in a job search, think about the things that will for sure put you in a spot where you won't get the job that you want. And I think that sometimes can be showing up with the wrong attitude to the interview. I mean, this is your one chance to make a first impression. I don't care if you're talking to a recruiter, a hiring manager, or the chief executive officer for the company. You should be showing up to the virtual or phone interview with a smile on your face because that's a huge thing. You should be excited to be there. The other thing I would say is, just general kindness, thank people after the interviews, reach out to them after the interviews, telling them that you appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedule to reach out to you. And I think if you do the opposite, if you follow up and you're saying, hey, where are we at with this? Or sending messages that are saying, what's taking so long? Or why is there so many steps to the interview? That's that sure route to get you not to where you want to go. So yes, follow up, do it in the right way, show up with general kindness, be excited, be positive, because if you do any of those opposites, you will not get to where you want to go. And that's for sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Kris. So now next segment is all about the managers of these business developers. Let's start with them. So business developers, let's say, are a bit of a special breed in the sense that they can really generate a lot of value for a company. We're all convinced of that, of course. But it's also a little bit of a I wouldn't say a difficult position, but that is true that based on our conversation with thousands of business developers, they do tend to end up in situations in which maybe the job itself was not very clear from the beginning. So sometimes the expectations between the manager and the teams are not very aligned. This means, and that usually brings people to get very frustrated with their job. Their manager also gets upset with them. And then eventually the person either is let go or they quit, right, their job. Now, personally, I believe, of course, it's always a two-way street, right? Because it's not only the manager's responsibility or the BD's responsibility to realign and so on. But that is one major problem with business developers. Of course, you're more on the recruitment side, but you had your own agency and you talk with a lot of people that eventually work in business development. Do you have some tips for the managers when facing these situations, right? So teams that get demotivated, that don't reach their targets, maybe they're confused about their job. So what can a manager do to prevent these resources to leave the company and really to realign on what they're supposed to be doing for the company?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important hires a company can make, and it's something that's overlooked, so even if you do it on a consulting basis, is a people and culture person. The reason I say that is they can help you align on these things and they can take a close look at your current employees, do reviews, talk to them, figure out what's going on. If you don't have the resources to do that, and again, you can look at people that do this on a consultancy basis and do it pretty cheap. But if you don't do that, I think you just got to take a step back. And, what I didn't say in my intro is I have also led a BDM team for about 2.5 years. And it was a commission only team. And that's a challenge. And especially when you're talking about keeping people motivated, because if they're not making deals, they're not making money. And one way we've successfully done that, and you can successfully do that, is by understanding the person, the individual, and not putting them into buckets. We make such a big mistake of thinking as of people in groups. They're a millennial, so we must motivate them this way, or they're a boomer, we'll motivate them this way, or they're a Gen Z, we'll motivate them this way. And I think that's just false. And I think that's kind of lazy. I think you really need to look at the person, get to understand them, get to know what, again, intrinsically motivates them, and pull on those strings. One person might need public recognition within the company to feel good every day. They might need to be told in the group setting, like, hey, this person's doing amazing. Another person may shy away from that, but might need the gratification on one-on-one attention. So I think you really need to understand the person on an individual level. And it's absolutely essential to take the time to do that. And so it is the BDM manager's responsibility to prioritize that. It's really, in my opinion, their main job.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for saying that. I believe that too. But, I think when we're talking about adults' relationships, professional relationships, I think it's always a little bit in the middle. But, I thought about this because I was just having a conversation, right, literally 1 hour ago with this business developer, and she's working for this company now for about 6 months. And she mentioned that the atmosphere is not, let's say, the easiest because although she managed to reach her targets and so on, the manager is still not very happy with what she's doing, right? It's like, this is not enough. Now, I think the main problem is really alignment in terms of like, okay, what do you expect from the resource? And then how do you enable the resource to do the right things? So let's talk about that. So how can managers, and drawing also from your experience as a manager of business developers, right? How can you enable your team to be successful? So what are the things that should be in place, right? To make sure that the business developers are effective?
Yeah, and this comes all the way back to the interview. I mean, when someone starts, you need to really hone into their strengths and weaknesses and get a basic understanding of what makes them tick. That's why I started with saying, what's the person's why for wanting to come work with you? Are they attached to the product? Will they like to learn more about the product on their own time because it's that exciting to them? And if you've made the right choice, this becomes a little bit easier. But I think you come back to those and you set up, in my opinion, it depends on the size of the company. Absolutely. So if you have a team of, let's say, 10 to 20 people, it might make sense, to put a bi-weekly one-on-one meeting with your team to kind of follow back up and say, hey, when we first met, when we interviewed, these were your strengths and weaknesses. Let's talk more about that and let me know where you need me. And I think it's just having this conversation over and over and over again. And it can feel repetitive, but every single time I've done this, I've gotten different answers. I've gotten different responses, and you learn a lot about the person, and the answers become more authentic as time goes on. And you get a better understanding of what they individually need. Again, I think it's too simple and somewhat lazy to kind of create a bulk idea that this is what I'm going to give my team to set them up for success, because what works for you might not work for me. I mean, me personally, I work best when someone gives me an objective and I get to go figure it out on my own, and I don't want to be bothered. But somebody else might need to be checked in on and might have questions that are frequent, and you got to find a channel of communication so they feel supported. And that only works if you're at the individual level.
Nice. Yeah, I really like your approach because it's really like on the personalization of the entire professional experience, right? So really from the interview stage, really trying to take it more on a personal level up to actually managing people based on their strengths and weaknesses. And this, it's also like one of the major trends, right? So of course we work in the space of education. Recruitment is not by itself like about developing the talent, but I'm pretty sure that as director of recruitment, that is something also that falls a little bit under your scope of work. So do you have maybe some insights into, how, let's say, the talent management? I don't like to see talent management, but really like talent development, what direction is it taking, and what should managers be aware of moving forward and really building successful business development teams?
Yeah, we're in a really strange time. And so there's always a delay in perceptions of markets. And what I mean by that is, in the pre-pandemic world, there was seemingly an unlimited amount of jobs. And it was, what we call like a candidate market. If you're a business developer, life was never better than in 2019 to find the job that was the perfect fit. Then in 2020, we saw a lot of furloughs, a lot of people getting laid off. But yet there was this strange perception that it was still a candidate market. So people looking for jobs still felt like they could demand whatever they wanted as an outcome. And then companies were on the opposite end thinking the exact opposite. And there was this mismatch in perspectives. We're in that same kind of place right now. Markets are shifting. I think it's harder and harder to find a job, yet candidates or employees have expectations that they still have all the control and power, but that's not necessarily the case. And so I think both sides need to adapt a bit, understand where they stand, and you need to be taking an inventory at all times on what's currently happening in the market. And I think if you're an employer, you need to understand that there is this misperception that your employees still have all the control. And you might think in your head and understand that, you could probably replace somebody that left pretty quickly right now. But I think it's still costly to do that, to retrain, get those people up and running. So you need to tailor your conversations with your staff with that in mind, knowing that they feel like it's still 2019, because there's this huge delay in these perceptions. And this is a balancing act right now. And so I think, it comes back to taking that personal inventory, figuring out what your people need. Do they need to be recognized on a weekly basis? Some people are like that, but they might also be your best performer, so it's worth it. Do other people need to be recognized in the group setting? And you need to do that to maintain and hold on to them. But I would say it's a very interesting time because there's a mismatch of perspectives on who's in control and who's got the most power. And I think it's a really delicate situation.
All right. Great, Kris. Thank you so much. This was super insightful. And I'm actually very curious to see how things will develop, right? So as you say, we're in a bit of a strange moment with a lot of uncertainty as well, I think. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things develop. But Kris, I would also like to leave the conversation at this for now. So we are at about half an hour chatting. As I told you, so last time we, for you, all of you listening, of course you cannot know, but we did have a conversation already about a week ago. And there's just so much I would like to ask you and cover. So maybe we should have another episode with you on board so that I can scratch off all my questions for you. But for now, thank you so much, Kris. This was really insightful. Do you have maybe any last piece of advice for someone entering in the magical world of business development?
Yeah. So this is for both sides, for hiring, and this could be a whole nother segment if there's interest, but on both sides, whether you're a business developer or you're someone looking for business development personnel, I always tell people that you need to look at recruitment and talent acquisition and job searching as the same thing as you do day to day in your job. I mean, finding the right job is a great business development experience in its own right. You are selling the most important product on the planet. It's yourself. You need to build your personal brand. You need to reach out. You need to get in front of the right people. And that's how you're going to find the right job. On the other end, if you're a company, same thing. You're selling the most important thing and it's your company and it's your reputation. And you need to be out there, doing not just job listings and brand building on a recruitment front, but also doing the outbound and taking the time to do it. It's worth it. And that would be my biggest piece of advice on parting here.
All right, Kris, thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day. And everyone listening, maybe if they want to reach out to you, I can leave your LinkedIn profile in the description, if that's okay for you.
Yeah, that will be fantastic. I'm very active over there and happy to chat with anybody and chat and so forth. So that'd be awesome.
Awesome. I'll do that. Thank you so much, Kris. Have a great day. And everyone listening, see you in the next episode.